Good evening. I would like to extend a warm welcome to our visionary members and other invited guests. Tonight, we have a fantastic program that speaks to the mission here at Levine Museum, which is connecting the past to the future to realize the promises of a new South. During tonight's panel discussion of Young Voices of Change, you will hear from young local community leaders who are making a difference right here in Charlotte and what is driving them to do so. Social movements that have impacted history have often been spearheaded by young leaders and activists. Here now to provide some historical context for tonight's discussion is our very own Dr. Willie Griffin.
Good evening. Historically, youth have fiercely led social movements not only in this country, but throughout much of the world. Their passion, not yet burdened and corrupted by age, has indeed allowed them to become impressive catalysts for change. No matter the era of reference, youth led both visibly and from behind the scenes. During the more memorable phases of the civil rights movement, television cameras helped document the instrumental roles youth played in the freedom rides and sit-ins. The late and one-time chairman of the Student Nonviolent Coordinating Committee, Representative John Lewis, himself a youth during the civil rights movement, called their work Good Trouble, fearless agitation designed to provoke and challenge and move progress forward. After close to 2 million young men were drafted into the U.S. military during the Vietnam War, it should be no surprise that young people were at the vanguard of protests against the conflict that helped turn American public against the war. Youth formed groups like the Students for Democratic Society and staged nonviolent marches, conducted sit-ins, and agitated against the war, which sometimes led to deadly encounters with law enforcement like the May 1970 Kent State Massacre. In the 1980s, the late 1980s, youth in China began demanding democratic reforms and greater economic opportunities in the face of widespread economic depression. Hundreds of thousands of Chinese youth took to the streets with banners and speeches and songs captivating international audiences. The protests took a horrific turn when thousands of soldiers descended on Tiananmen Square, opened fire on armed students, and crushed the movement with tanks and rifles. The extent of the casualties are still unknown to us today. In the second decade of the 21st century, Arab Spring, a series of anti-government protests, was sparked by the death of a young Tunisian street vendor who set himself on fire after the police officer confiscated his card. He became a symbol of the frustration felt over police corruption, economic woes, human rights violations, and oppressive regimes. Scholars argue that the movement, quote, could not have occurred without the ideological and numerical push of a huge mass of angry youth, who made use of social media to help organize an unprecedented revolution that started in Tunisia and spread to Egypt, Libya, and other Middle Eastern countries. In the same decade, here in America, Native youth organized protests after a series of controversial pipelines like the Dakota Access Pipeline were scheduled for construction to help deliver oil throughout the United States. The fact that these pipelines were slated to run through or near Native American land and waterways led to the galvanization of Native youth who strenuously opposed the plans due to the potential environment damage to the natural resources found on their ancestral lands. The Dakota pipeline sparked outrage that drew thousands of demonstrators to an encampment in Standing Rock in 2016. This became the site of protest and arrests. Out of this protest grew the International Indigenous Youth Council, which works to inspire, organize, and empower young leaders on behalf of the environment. I would be remiss if I did not mention the roles that youth have played in calling for stricter gun control measures on the heels of a rash of gunmen walking into schools and opening fire, or the role that youth continue to play in the Black Lives Matter movement that began in the aftermath of the shooting deaths of Trayvon Martin and Michael Brown, and which have more recently become an international movement in the wake of the deaths of Breonna Taylor, Ahmaud Arbery, and George Floyd. The point that I simply want to make is that youth-led social movements are not a new phenomenon. Young people have been in the vanguard of social change in the interest of civil, human, and environmental rights for generations. Right here in Charlotte, it was students at Johnson C. Smith that led protests for equal employment opportunities at the post office in the 1940s and sit-ins to integrate public facilities in the 1960s. Bobby Seale and Huey Newton were in their 20s when they created the Black Panther Party for self-defense in Oakland, California, in 1966. And it was a 26-year-old preacher from Atlanta named Martin Luther King Jr. who rose to prominence in 1955 to become a leader in the civil rights movement. Today, teenaged environmental activists from Kenya, India, Ecuador, and Uganda are leading charges for clean water, conservation, and the banning of plastics. Organized youth force older generations to take action, change policies, and create more equitable and just societies. And now back to our Director of Development, Marcus Kimbrough. I hope you enjoy the program.
Thank you, Dr. Griffin. And now I'd like to kick it over to our panelists for this evening, which will be led by our moderator, Don Thomas.
Peace and blessings, everyone, and good evening. My name is Don Thomas. I am the Executive Director of My Brother's Keeper, Charlotte Mecklenburg, where we are committed to ensuring that every Black and brown boy born in Charlotte Mecklenburg has every opportunity to achieve as acting as a backbone organization of a collective impact effort. I am absolutely honored to be partnering with the Levine Museum of the New South and excited to facilitate such a timely conversation. So what I would like to do is bring our panelists out and we're going to have them introduce themselves. And I can just say this, that just from my preliminary research, scratching the surface, in fact, I was intrigued when I seen the lineup of the panel, but in that preliminary research, my intrigue transformed to being inspired. And so I'm excited about this conversation this evening. And so leaders, how you doing this evening? I hope you're doing well. And I hope you're just as excited and enthused about this conversation. The way we want to kind of start this conversation today is I want you to kind of tell us a little bit about yourself and tell us about the organization that you represent. And then from there, we'll kind of dive in. If you don't mind, Kiana, I'd like to start with you.
Absolutely. My name is Kiana Osborne. Thank you, Don, for hosting us tonight. I'm representing an organization called It Ends Now Charlotte, and I co-founded that organization just last year. It was right after the murder of George Floyd that two friends of mine and I, through a Facebook post, decided that was enough. We weren't just going to allow the church to be silent on issues regarding racism anymore. I didn't care who had my back. I was just like, we have to take to the streets. We have to do this. And so that's how It Ends Now was formed. We're still under a year old, so I'm doing a lot of learning. Didn't even plan to start an organization, but it just became so I guess, imperative that something exists here in Charlotte representing the church and making sure that the church was relevant in this fight against racism. So yeah, I'm excited to be here and look forward to learning and being alongside all of you leaders as well. Outstanding.
Kiana, thank you so much. And I am excited about this conversation as well. And thank you so much for your commitment to the uplift of the human condition. Maggie, let's go to you. Please introduce yourself and your organization to us tonight.
All right, thank you so much for having me again. Hi, my name is Maggie. I'm Maggie Murphy. I am from Holly Springs, North Carolina, and I am representing March for Our Lives, specifically March for Our Lives North Carolina. March for Our Lives was founded as an organization after the shooting that happened on February 14th, 2018 at Parkland High School. Or this high school in Parkland, Florida, that killed students and traumatized an entire city and a nation. And I got involved in 2019 after shooting that happened at my school, UNC Charlotte. And since then, I am the co-director for the state of North Carolina for March for Our Lives. And our goal is to eradicate gun violence in all forms. This isn't really just fighting for gun control, it's fighting for community-based solutions, things that the community decides is the best versus what have now decided is the right thing to do. And so our goal is not only to push for Congress to pass legislation to help communities, but to also help elevate the communities in the or that are already in place, trying to bring about that kind of change to these communities. But yeah, thank you so much.
Thank you so much. Nada, please.
Hi, y'all. My name is Nada. Like, it's not a problem. Forget it. I work as the programs director for Charlotte Pride, which is just a really fancy way to say that I coordinate a lot of events. So I work to build up the scholarship program, Women's Pride, Trans Pride, Latinx Pride, and as of recently, developed new programming such as the COVID-19 Fund, where we're making sure to commit to mutual aid and direct action work that represents the most marginalized members of the LGBTQ community.
Outstanding. Outstanding. Thank you guys so much. So the way I would like to start this conversation is I'm a fan of allowing the why to root us in how we move forward, right? And then if we can establish the why, then everything else are kind of, we know what to measure things to. And so I would like to ask that question, and we can start right with you, Nada. Again, what I would like for all three of you to do is just tell us what your why is. What is your why?
So there's a couple different whys for me, but in regards to Charlotte Pride specifically versus like all organizing, why it was important for me to enter the space of Charlotte Pride is because I was seeing a lot of nonprofit spaces that were saying like, protect Black queer folks, protect Black trans folks, protect Black trans women, but their staff and board didn't really represent the intersections of those identities. I was seeing more and more the radical politics that was coming out of not just the queer community, but that was coming out of revolutionary movement period, were built and curated by Black queer folk, Black trans folk, and most importantly, Black trans women. But these are not the folks who are holding staff positions in nonprofit, not the folks who are having large platforms, not the folks who are being heard and acknowledged in those spaces. So I saw, I'm sorry, please excuse my puppy. I saw Charlotte Pride as an opportunity to enter a space where the staff was, prior to me being in that space, all white, and enter into that space with the intention of seeing that this was a large nonprofit that was building equity in the LGBTQ community, and knowing that I could exist in that space and help make sure that those funds are being reallocated to the most marginalized members of our community and to the members of our community who are doing the most legitimate and most necessary work.
Thank you for that. I love, at least what I heard from that was the importance of proximity. So often things are being organized and solutions are created for folks that are not necessarily proximate to the issues and the challenges that they are trying to rectify. So I appreciate you bringing that up. Maggie, let's move to you. What is your why?
Well, I was thinking about this question, and I guess for me, one of the things we talk about in March for Our Lives in our training is the most powerful thing you have is the story of self of why you're doing this. And I think for me, my story is why not? Why not me? Why not anybody? I think given having two dads growing up kind of really opened my eyes to a lot of things when I was really young. I remember trying to, say, oh, my dad's they're roommates, and things like that, trying to distract away from this idea that it was something that was abnormal and now it's considered so normal. And so even just seeing that and knowing how fast social change happens, I think it was one of the first times where I was realized that I could do something about things. And I also remember the first time where I kind of learned the word feminine, and I remember just, spatting it out and having someone go, "Oh, I'm an equalist," and me explaining to them why that's not a real thing. And, kind of baby's first activist steps. But as I've gotten older, I've realized it's even more important that I continue to do the work that I do, not only because it is the right thing, or not only is because it's what I'm passionate about, but it's also because it's the right thing to do given my privilege in society. And I think that, why not? Why can some people stand aside and do nothing while other people have to fight for their lives? And, yes, my answer is not. Why not me?
I love that. Why not? Not trying to pass the buck, but looking at social ills and issues and leaning in to it. It takes a certain disposition to look at a challenge and not look side to side to see who's going to do it, and jump in and lean in and put your hands to the plow for justice and liberation. So I appreciate that. I appreciate that, and I would love to have a conversation maybe later if we have time around the importance of how to create that type of disposition. What things can we put into the environment by which we see challenges and are compelled to lean in, as opposed to pass the buck, so to speak, right? So Maggie, I appreciate that. Kiana, peace and blessings. What is your why?
I think my why is similar to both Nada and Maggie. With Maggie, I agree, why not? And with Nada, there's so many layers to the why. But I felt like not enough was being done. And I kept trying to get into spaces where I thought something was being done, specifically in my case to end systemic racism. And I would always reach this point where it was like, well, no, we can't do that. Yeah. And so it was like, okay, well, maybe we can. And so as we all know, after COVID happened, there were 3 back-to-back murders of African Americans, Black people. Mm-hmm. And so after George Floyd, it was like, okay, this is enough, especially in the Christian faith. And this is why I say that there's multiple layers to my why. I left the Christian faith at one point and now have gotten to a place where I strongly believe in what the Bible says and what is taught. And because I believe it so strongly, there's no way that I can sit by and not do anything. That it's just not what Jesus stood for. It's not what he asked his followers to stand for. And so the Christian faith has gained a stereotype that does not actually represent Christianity. Mm-hmm. And so I would like to restore some of what Jesus actually died for, all while fighting for people who look like me as well.
Yeah, that's outstanding. I appreciate that. And to your point, to Nada and Maggie, the fact of the matter is there are themes that was lifted up that transcend, right? If you're committed to the uplift of the human condition, there are certain pieces and components of our why that transcend ourselves. So there would definitely be some things that can be tied in there. And I appreciate the fact that that you were willing to get engaged in trying to find these spaces, and from that search, right, had the courage to create a space, to create a space by which truth can be established, by which relationships can be forged, right, by which trust can be maximized in order to move collectively towards an environment by which we can thrive, and by which everyone belongs. So I love that, and I appreciate that. Now I have a certain theological leaning, right, and so we'll get into that a little later. But I love the fact that you are because you're fighting it on 2 ends, right? There's a traditional framework that is comfortable with the kind of misinterpretation of right the text, and then there are those that are trying to bring about some true good news to the poor and dispossessed. And so I appreciate you at the least being willing to struggle and with those concepts. It's good stuff. I'm fired up. Nada, you mentioned earlier in your why, you mentioned briefly around your why, how it was layered, and you mentioned that you talked about the organization, but then you mentioned briefly like just organizing in general, but we'll just stick with right. I heard that, and providentially there was a question based on me just kind of doing a little research on Nada, right? That it reminded me of a conversation that was had by Stokely Carmichael, right? Who changed his name later to Kwame Ture. He had a conversation around the distinction between mobilizing and organizing, right? He said that Martin Luther King was a great mobilizer in that he was able to bring folks together, right, around a certain thing, and the people came out and they did that thing for that cause. He said Malcolm X, however, was a great mobilizer and organizer, because not only could he galvanize the people around a thing, every city he went into, he established an institution, right? So we can keep that thing that we have galvanized around. We can continue to push that even when I'm long gone, right? And so with that context, and given your background in nonprofit organizing, given your background in equity-based organizing, which definitely got me stirred up a little bit, and hopefully we can get into that and you touch on that a bit. But I would love to know your definition of organizing, right? I've only been in Charlotte for 7 years, 6 years and some change, and I've never met so many community organizers. The folks throwing that term around is unreal how many times I've heard that. But I would love to get your definition on community organizing. And then in addition, do you think that there needs to be a universal definition around organizing that guides how we do social change organizing here in our community?
Yeah. Sorry, there were a lot of layers to that question.
It was.
That's okay. That's great. It was a great question. I think this is like the part where people normally give these really long layered responses, but like organizing is pretty simple in the sense that it's just collective bargaining. Mm-hmm. And I think people always assume that organizing is collective bargaining based in good, based in truth, based in liberation, but that's not particularly true. Mm-hmm. Because when we think of like what happened at the Capitol, that was organizing. Mm-hmm. They organized. They did that through organizing. They collectively bargained for what they felt was I don't know what to really call it. What they felt was, I guess, necessary in the white supremacist lens. Mm-hmm. So organizing is really that simple in the sense that it's just collective bargaining. You know, the community coming together to collectively bargain towards something that community wants, regardless of whether that thing is good or not. And I think that there is already a universal definition of organizing, but I think the more important thing to build up is what is the definition of good, equitable, intersectional organizing based in collective. And I'm also really glad that you asked me this question, because I actually had like a small article that I'd written that outlined like the 7 most important steps to building good, intersectional, equitable, like organizing. And the first one was that we must trust communities that we serve to be able to know needs. And that spoke a little bit about why I joined Charlotte Pride, right? Mm-hmm. Yeah. Is that if we're going to be serving Black queer folks, we need Black queer folk at the helm of that. If we're going to be serving Black folk who are traumatized by police brutality, it's important to put Black folk who are traumatized by police brutality at the helm of that. It can't just be Black folk, period. It has to be Black folk who are directly affected. And even if we're not talking about Black folks, right? If we're serving a community, it has to be led by the community that is directly affected by the harm. And then number 2 is we must constantly be challenging white supremacist culture when it shows up in our own spaces and hold each other accountable to that continued work. Because I think people forget that white supremacy is a lot of the realm that we exist under, Like we as activists, I was about to say abolitionists, I'm sorry, as
By
Black
all
org.
means.
Okay, I don't want to say, but I am. So like
Yeah.
as Black folk who are activists and organizers, as folks who are organizers, period. We're constantly rejecting white supremacy, but no matter what, it's the realm that we exist under. It constantly finds ways to creep into our spaces, right? And like symptoms of white supremacy, such as urgency, such as like desire for punishment, right? Because that's how we got mass incarceration. We have a society that's obsessed with punishment, and that's white supremacy. So when these cultures show up in our spaces, we must hold ourselves accountable to that. And instead of just saying, "Oh well, I'm not a white supremacist. White supremacy will never show up in my space." We have to hold ourselves accountable to that. It will show up in our space, and we must do the internal work to change when when it does happen versus getting defensive.
I love that.
Yeah.
Can you send that link to us, to
Sure.
that article? Yeah. Because even though there is a universal, you would say that there is a universal definition.
Mhm.
I wouldn't necessarily say there's a universal definition, right? I don't, because there are some folks that may share some differing views around what I perceive to be organizing, but I think that a great community starter could be the 7 principles that you laid out around organizing. That could be a starter to that conversation to establish what that universal definition means. So folks just can't use it arbitrarily. It still holds its potency and its importance. So I appreciate that. If you could do that for us.
Yeah.
I'm gonna move forward, and I'm gonna move forward with Maggie. This is a question around the school shooting at UNCC and how your voice emerged in that work very courageously, in fact. And so I've been thinking, right, as around how do you lead in the midst of crisis, right? How do you lead when things are there? What is grounding you and kind of grounding you, right, in the midst of it all, to keep your mind focused? Those are the things that I've been kind of thinking through. And so I would like to ask you a question, and this is the question I want to ask you. In the midst of all of that, right, in the midst of all of that, what did you learn about yourself, and what did you learn about your leadership?
That's a fantastic question. I first wanted to comment real quick. Nadi did an amazing job answering the question. It was perfect. But I've been thinking about this question for a while, about what I've learned about myself and things like that through it, because it was something that happened really fast. Even though, oh my God, almost 2 years later, that just registered. But I don't know how it affected me, and it's something that I'm learning every day. I think I hold my friend closer. I think I, worry when my brother was going to school in person. Those are some of on the surface things, but then on a larger scale, it started me making worry about the other kids who go to school every day, and the other campuses, and the other families that are torn apart from gun violence and all other things. And so it really changed my perspective on how I handle issues by looking at issues, a social issue versus a single isolated issue. Because so that the reasons that the shooting at my school happened are different than why every other shooting happens. It doesn't mean that the issue itself is, isolated. And so we can't pretend like a vacuum. And so understanding that gun violence is an issue in every society, that it's perpetuated by, white supremacy, like that, understanding how intersectional issues, I think, is one of the biggest things out of this, because I remember the first time somebody critiqued my very harshly about being too white focused and by bringing in enough people of color. And I don't disagree. At first, there's this, white, immediate, and where you're like, oh, I'm not racist. Like I couldn't do anything like that. I can't perpetuate, supremacy or anything like that. If I know about it, I can't do it. But it's the understanding that you have to be mindful of every single thing you do, because in such a fragile state as activism, you have to know what you're doing, because all of your actions have consequences. And so I think the way that my changed throughout this is understanding that every single one of my actions have consequences, and that there are real people's lives at stake that are different and do not have the same experience as me. And just because I don't know specifically what that looks like for them, it can't mean and I close my mind off from listening to their critiques. And so being able to take criticism and hold myself accountable for mistakes, I think is what I got the most out of the whole situation.
Outstanding. Thank you so much for that, and thank you for your leadership during that time. Right, to be a young leader in that time and be able to navigate that space and to be astute in your own reflection, cognizant of issues versus and stand focused on that issue to be able to drive it home. Outstanding work. Kiana, given how It Ends Now was developed, right? This kind of urgency to ensure that the church doesn't remain or doesn't stay on the sidelines, so to speak, but getting engaged in a very real, tangible way, right, in this work. And so the struggle for Black liberation, which seems to be antiquitous to a certain degree, the Black church in particular, has been the epicenter for the revolt against systems of oppression. But in the last few decades or so, there has been the question of relevance, whether religion in general, Christianity in particular, are viable options for the uplift of the human condition. So as you merge in your own leadership, how are you looking to answer the question of relevance?
Yeah, I think the fact that the Black church has been leading in this fight throughout history is one thing that we, with the co-founders of It Ends Now, want to make sure that we stress. It's funny, we actually almost named, and it wasn't an organization at the time, but the day that we marched, we almost named it, It Starts With Us. And in our conversation, we were saying, no, it doesn't. People have been fighting for this for years, but it needs to stop. The fight needs to end. And so we want it to end now. And in no way, shape, or form are we claiming that is on us. It's generations that have taught us how to fight this fight. And so all respect goes to the people that have fought before me. And so as I learned to lead in a time where I was not asking to lead, I think I look first and foremost to those people, the people who have led, and learning from their mistakes and the moves that they've made, the successes that they've had as well. And I think the key with the church in particular and leading in this space is some of what Maggie just said. And I'm so glad, Maggie, that you put it into words so well, because you talk about having to think about and consider so many different perspectives and lenses. And especially with Christianity today, there are thousands of denominations. So there are so many perspectives to consider and experiences to make sure are understood. And each word that you use in a post, in a video recording like this, where it's permanent. And so my goal is to really make sure that I'm leaving room for God to move in this movement, and not saying that I'm right in anything that I say or the leaders that come alongside me, but that we're aiming as much as possible to follow the example of someone who's already lived before us. So I think that's my key. And Maggie, I'm learning every day how scrutinized the things that we say can be, and how important words are. You know, you use one word incorrectly and that can ruin an entire movement, or it can launch and catapult an entire movement. So I'm really excited for the opportunity to help the entire American church, all denominations, lead here in this century in the fight to end systemic racism, which I actually just had a conversation with some board members, as Nada was talking about and Maggie added to, that systemic racism is rooted in white supremacy. And so, plain and simple, white supremacy is thinking that white is better. And so any of us can perpetuate that as we've been born into it. So making sure that we end that idea in general is what we're after, and what I hope to accomplish without anyone ever thinking that I want to have the right answer or think I have the right answer, or that what I say is or final.
Outstanding. Thank you so much for that. I was thinking while you were speaking around just your commitment, even understanding that I may not have all the right answers, but I'm committed to this work. And I think that's just where it's at. When my football coach in college, he would say that perfection has more to do with your effort than it does the outcome. And it always stuck with me. Now, he probably said that because we lost so many games, I'm not sure, right, to try to make us feel better after getting whooped. But it stuck with me because no matter where I go, what I find is that once we put forth the perfect effort, it may not always be the right outcome that you're looking for. It may not be that, but your commitment and the perfection of your effort, I think 9 times out of 10 will get us to where we're trying to go. So I appreciate you sharing. You brought up a great point around the folks that came before you, right? The folks that came before you. And I appreciate you bringing that into the space. I'm always concerned when it comes to social change movements. One of the things that I'm kind of sensitive to is the generational divides, right? I'm always cognizant of how are we bridging, right? And I heard the term intersectionality a few times this evening, which is vitally important. How do we bridge that divide? And so I gave a keynote the other day for the Mayor's Mentor Alliance in their award ceremony. And one of the things that I mentioned was this notion around the generation of now, right? The generation of now. And what the generation of now is about is not necessarily around whether you're a baby boomer or Gen Z, right? We are the generation of now. This present day, we have a responsibility to put our hands to the plow to shift the conditions that we're trying to shift collectively. And so in the notion of a generation of now, there was a point that I mentioned. And the great Maya Angelou, she was talking to some young people, and towards the closing of her message, she said 3 lines, and the lines were to these young people that you are the best that we have. You are all that we have. You are what we have become, right? You are what we have become. And so when I think about that generational bridging the generational divide, when I think about the intersectionality of experience, right? When I think about all these things, a notion that I would like to kind of talk through real quick is we can acknowledge that we are standing on shoulders, right? We are standing on some folks that came before us that risked life and limb for liberation and justice. Folks that have been around for a long time that we still kind of standing on their shoulders. But when I think about this question, is how are we preparing our shoulders to be stood upon, right? Is a question that I would like us to think through. And so essentially this question is around, and this is many years from now, but what is the legacy that you are hoping to leave behind, right? What's the legacy that you're hoping to leave behind as young leaders today? And I'll let you guys kind of decide who goes first on this one.
I'll answer because I heard Nada, Maggie, and Don, you say it So I know that I'm in a space where everyone's in agreement. I would like to leave a legacy that we are better together. I think, especially in Charlotte, but I can't say especially because I've never lived as an adult anywhere else. So I don't know if the culture is like this in other places, but we often work so siloed. Don, you talked about how everyone's a social change leader now. And I think that one thing that It Ends Now really wants to do is make sure that we're working with anyone who agrees that systemic racism needs to end. Like, if we can agree on that, we can work together. It doesn't matter if you believe the same thing that we believe, if you want to execute the same way we want to execute, but there's some way that we can work together. And so that's the legacy that I would love to leave behind, that we work together no matter your age, no matter your race, no matter your ideology, because that's how you accomplish the end goal.
That's great. That's great.
I can go next. I think the legacy I want to leave behind, which is a very strange question because I'm only 20, so it's still, I haven't quite thought that far yet. I don't even know what I'm doing for dinner tonight. But I want to leave a legacy of radical love and radical acceptance of others, of caring for each other, of instead of moving out of this American mindset of pulling yourself up by your bootstraps, and that you are only responsible for yourself, and build a more community-minded America. Because that's the only way we're going to survive. That's the only way we're going to be able to fight systemic racism. It's the only way we're going to fight sexism, homophobia, ableism, is when we start treating each other not as competitors in a capitalistic or capitalist economy, but instead that we need to live with and get along with and work together to get to a better world. And so I think that, in its most simplistic terms, radical love and radical acceptance.
That's outstanding. Thank you for that.
I think for me, it's important to leave behind a legacy of rejecting white supremacy and the systems that exist within it, and dreaming. I want a legacy of being a dreamer who's able to dream of liberation in a new way outside the systems that we know and outside of what is comfortable for us.
I love it. I love it. So go, did you, I don't know, are you finished? Did you finish?
Yeah, go ahead. Sorry.
No, go ahead, Kiana, please.
I was commenting on Nada's part about dreaming, and I was just saying that that's awesome. I think some of what was introduced at the beginning when Mr. Willie spoke, and Don when you spoke, and all of us, there's this history of youth leading movements. And I think Mr. Willie said something about the fact that, life hasn't tainted us yet. And so I think that would be awesome to leave behind this legacy of dreaming, to where no matter how old you are, like, you still believe that things can be better, so you're going to work towards it. That would be amazing. And I think is why so many movements are led by young people. So I just appreciated that comment.
Yeah.
I want to kind of bounce off of that. I think one of the things I remember a lot when I got older, or that when I grew up, is, you're just going to get more Republican. And I being told, as you get older, you get more stingy. And I really, with all my heart, I hope that doesn't happen. And I'm going to do everything in my effort to not have that happen, because, parties aside, I want to continuously care for others around me and be cognizant of the social landscape, trying to my dad, the new pronouns and things like that. But he's able, and so, it's, I want to be able to continue to listen, even maybe after my mind's been made. It will never be made up, though.
Mhm. That's outstanding. That's outstanding. I want to. I was intrigued by the dreamer as well, right? I think that especially when we think through uh, from a historical kind of context, think about systems that have been created to stifle the dream, to stifle your imagination, where you can only think within the box that I'm creating for you. Uh, we often have conversations around uh, how environments kind of dictate behavior, right? It's like we can create an environment that you can only think about this. You only thinking about you, right? And it's not until you get into another type of environment to where you start to or exposed to something where you like, I didn't even know that was possible. I didn't know black people could essentially be this. I didn't know women could be in this position and do that. I didn't think that was even possible. And so to say that you would love for your legacy to be wrapped in the unlimited capacity to dream is a very, 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 very profound notion, and I appreciate you bringing that up. That's good. I appreciate you bringing that up.
Appreciate y'all for responding to it positively. It's all about dreaming and building based off that dream. I was going to mention, like, outside of Charlotte Pride, like, we work to build Feed the Movement, because we were seeing that this system that was built by the state, and the state that we exist under is rooted in white supremacy, said that we're going to build food stamps. And we noticed, especially through COVID, right, that folks were getting access to this, and that when they were getting access to food pantries, they had to spend, like, say, the last $5 they had on transportation to get to that food pantry.
Mm-hmm.
So in having creativity and being dreamers and being able to say, we don't have to work with these systems, we can build our own.
Yeah.
We built a completely free, no-cost grocery delivery program where you didn't have to prove your poverty to get in. We didn't make you fill out 20 pages of forms. You
Yeah.
just gave us the list and we bought the groceries.
Yeah.
And part of that, like, and it's so hard to dream under capitalism and under white supremacy unless we're constantly unlearning. So for me, yeah, it's very important to dream. It's very important to build based off our dreams, to exist without restrictions, to constantly remind ourselves that we don't need these systems, that we can continue to build our own until the end of times. And everything that we build, none of it is rooted in white supremacy. None of it has to be rooted in what was made before. All of it can be rooted in the revolution that we bring now, the way that we exist now.
Yeah, that's good. That's good. And I think the way when I talked earlier around how do we create a system, how do we design a framework by which when I mentioned when Maggie was saying that why not me, right? How do we build a system where that disposition is created? How do we create an environment and design a system by which we remove the shackles of one's mind so they can dream anew? And one of the ways that I think that I know is key to establishing that is to Kiana's point around collaboration, right? To say that I want my legacy to be rooted and grounded in the fact that I was not afraid to step out of an echo chamber, that I was willing to allow iron to sharpen iron, right? That you see how I threw the little biblical framework in there, right? Right. So and so it takes us to be able to build this collective, right? One of the things that we've been doing with My Brother's Keeper is that we're thinking through how do we create a framework? How do we create a vision, a collective vision by which the grassroots, grass top, we can share the same worldview to start moving. How do you get folks inspired that are not only proximate to the suffering, but also proximate to the power? How do you inspire folks to want to engage in the uplift of the human condition? We're all on this journey of becoming, right? And I think that it's going to be through the collaboration. It's going to be through the collective by which we reach those goals, right? By which we reach those goals. And so that would lead us to, we have about 5-10 minutes left. I believe we're going to 8, if I'm not mistaken. Is that I would love for us, and maybe this will be the challenge, right? Is it okay to have the challenge? I think that the challenge that I would like to provide for you, this kind of call to action, is that Kiana, Maggie, and Nada, that you guys are thinking through a collaboration to move a social change agenda forward that looks to eliminate systemic racism and in fact build systemic freedom, systemic liberation, systemic creativity. And so I would love for that to happen, right? And so that's my challenge to you all. And somebody says a question to add to the screen, onto the screen. Anybody have a question, you can add it. We have some stuff going on in the back, and I'm trying to, okay, how can we get involved in each of your movements and support you? Thank you, Alex, for that question. How can we get involved in each of your movements and support you? And you can choose your own order to answer that question.
So I guess I can quickly start. So if you're interested in directly getting involved with March for Our Lives, you can visit marchforourlives.com. But if you want into the more specific, donate towards the gun violence prevention cause, find local groups who are doing the work. Donate directly to survivors of gun violence. Especially our Black and Brown survivors of gun violence, donate to groups that find different solutions to policing in our communities, address the problem at its source versus the national organization, because you can do so smaller on what we consider to be a smaller scale, but your money has a lot bigger of a reach in your day-to-day life than donating to a national organization. So support your community before you support a national organization.
Support local. I love it. Who's next? Yep, go ahead.
I guess the best way to get involved with It Ends Now, Charlotte, is to follow us on social media. We're on Facebook and Instagram. You can buy apparel at our website, It Ends Now, Charlotte, or clt.org. I've actually heard that when you wear one of our shirts, you get stopped a lot and end up getting to tell more about your own personal why. And then sharing a lot of our social media posts helps create conversations. We've started to have discussion groups and events and things like that. A lot of our volunteer needs right now are on a as needed basis, but we're hoping that probably by the middle of this year, we'll have formed committees and opportunities for people to be involved on a regular basis. So I would say follow us. You can shoot an email to us if you have a specific question. We're the same thing, It Ends Now CLT. That's at gmail.org. Our website is .org, and that's our Instagram and Facebook as well.
Outstanding. Thank you for that. And I definitely need a t-shirt. I'm a t-shirt kind of guy. So yeah, just put that out there.
You're ready for people to stop and talk to you about what it said.
No doubt about it. No doubt about it. Nada, please.
Y'all can support Pride by volunteering with Charlotte Pride. You can find that on the website, charlottepride.org. But if the question is like how you can support me personally, like you support me by doing your own internal work. You support me by reading Asada, by reading Angela Davis, by listening to the speeches of Marsha P. Johnson, of Baynard Rustin. You support me when you do your work so that we can all come into this space as strong as we possibly can.
I love that. So I'm excited. I love Asada. Asada is a book that I gave to give to my daughters, and so my oldest, who's now she's at Hampton finishing up her last year. My soon to be 13-year-old, she has it in her possession. We kind of pass it down. There's a great song by Common Sense around Asada, around the story of Asada Shakur that it will bless your heart if you listen to it. So I appreciate your leadership. I do want to say that for sure. I have been inspired by your commitment to this work. And I appreciate your commitment to continue to become the leaders, right? To continue to refine your leadership and continue to serve, right? I think too often we forget the necessity to serve as leaders. And so I appreciate your servant's heart. I appreciate you allowing yourself to be, that your ear is close to those that are proximate, that you are proximate, and that you always are guided by your why. I appreciate it. I appreciate it. So any final thoughts that you want to leave with some folks in our last kind of 5 minutes? Any closing thoughts? I love to shout out the internal work. We have a question here by Eric Scott. Where do you see hope in each of your causes? That's outstanding. And I'll choose here, and we'll start with Maggie.
I think this is going to sound like a very, very generic answer, but I see a lot of hope in our youth. I always felt like I very much got into activism in political, the political sphere at a very young age. And I was about 18, 17, something like that. And there are people who are on my state board who were like 15. And I think one of the youngest board members in March for Our Lives is like 13. So, these kids are, handling these things at such a young age. Some have been traumatized by gun violence. Some of them who've been traumatized, white supremacy, and are victims to the capitalist world we live in. And instead of staying still, which is a completely valid thing, not everyone can be the person who stands up, but they are stepping forward and saying that's enough. And that brings me a lot of hope, where sometimes when I feel like I'm slowing down, I remember, like, I feel like an old youth activist. So it's very strange working with people so much younger than you, remembering their work, and don't do the work, then more people will have to go in our position, and more people shouldn't have to advocate for themselves. It should already be a given in our. And so the youth really gives me hope. And yeah, my generation really, really does give me hope.
Outstanding. There's nothing better than being inspired by your own generation. That's good. That's real good. Kiana.
Well, so I am going to have to give a cliche answer myself, because I don't think I would be a follower of Christ if I didn't say that my ultimate hope is in Christ. I absolutely believe that justice will come, because that's what Jesus stood for. But I also know that that's not the answer that people want to hear. So I agree with Maggie. I agree for different reasons, though. I've been really encouraged by the fact that this generation, mine included, and the one coming behind me, are open-minded. I knew Nada's name from somewhere, and she mentioned Feed the Movement. So Feed the Movement has partnered with It Ends Now before. Feed the Movement is not Christian or Christ-centered, but we've worked together. And we've actually had volunteers who identify as Buddhist, atheist. And so I think the fact that these two generations are very open to being in the same space with people who don't believe the same thing as them is so encouraging. I just absolutely believe that we can make change happen because of the openness and the open-mindedness of those in this fight right now.
I appreciate that. And incidentally, in collaborating with an organization that's feeding the hungry, I believe in the book of Matthew, I could be, when Jesus said, "When I was hungry, you fed me," and the disciples are trying to figure out, like, what do you mean? He talked about when I was in jail, you came to me, when I was sick, so on and so forth. And Jesus said, "When you did it to the least of us, to my brethren, it's as if you were doing it unto me." And so sometimes, and I can appreciate these sentiments, is that sometimes we get caught up in the religiosity of who Christ is, and we miss out on the essence of his ministry. And if we can start to understand the essence of his ministry, we would find we would find that those that call themselves Christian are not necessarily right following Christ. And so there's a distinction, and this is not the time for that conversation, but one day we probably will have that conversation. Nada, is there hope in your causes, and where can you find that hope?
So in the work that I do with the LGBTQ community, usually I'm working with a lot of the most marginalized members of our community. So I'm seeing a lot of Black queer folks, brown queer folks, Black and brown queer and trans folk. And I am constantly inspired by their ability to dream, because such an in-depth part of the history of Black queer and trans culture is dreaming, right? Is building ballroom culture up from nothing, is building drag culture up from nothing. I get to work with the most incredible dreamers of our society, and it's sad. And these are all the people who our society tells us you're traditionally supposed to ignore, right? Like, these are people that exist in such deep intersections of marginalization that they don't get platforms, but there are dreamers, and these are the folks that build up our movement. So it gives me hope when I hear their capacity to dream, and just our collective capacity to dream.
Yeah. Outstanding. We're about a minute or so behind time, over schedule, right? And I've enjoyed this conversation. It's my hope.
Do you find hope anywhere?
Say that again.
Do you find hope anywhere?
Oh my goodness. Of course, right? Of course. One, and this is not just kind of just saying it to say it. I find hope in this conversation, right? So when you are creeping up on 40, you start to reflect upon your own mortality, and you start to think around questions around your legacy and things like that. And so as I sit here with young leaders who have committed themselves to the uplift of the human condition, you'll hear me say that a lot as we continue to build in the future, because that's what we need to commit ourselves to. As we think through that, I find hope. I find hope in the fact that we can have folks that are proximate, that are building solutions. I find hope in that. I find hope in the fact that we have folks that are elders in community, those that are 20 years old and activists in community, that have their hands firmly to the plow of justice and liberation. And I find hope that that white power structures and white supremacy is crumbling, and I feel privileged and honored to see it crumble. And so I find hope in that, and I find hope that I have 3 new comrades in this work, and I look forward to moving forward and watching you guys blossom and seeing the great work that you do for humanity. So thank you so much for this conversation. Thank you for the work that you do. Thank you for your commitment. Thank you for placing commitment over merit. Ladies, I appreciate that so much. And so good luck in all your endeavors. We're going to take it back to Marcus. Kimbrough, once again, thank you so much for your time.
What a powerful conversation. I'm shaking here because, you ended with hope, but then I'm hearing commitment. I love the way the conversation started out with, what is your why? Nada, when you spoke to, this collective bargaining, I had never really thought about it that way, but it was spot on. I'm energized. I'm truly energized. And we're going to have to figure out a way, as Don said, to continue this conversation, continue this dialogue with each and every one of you. So thank you. Nada, Maggie, Kiana, Don, thank you guys for bringing, for coming together with us to have this conversation and really talk about, why you do what you do and how it came to be, because you guys truly are the next generation that is going to lead us through and to that promised land. I feel like we've been at church. We need to go ahead and pass the plate around and get that collection going, but it has been truly an inspiring evening. I just want to touch base on one thing for us. Please everyone that's watching, you guys come back and visit us here at Levine Museum of the New South, and go on our website, museumofthenewsouth.org, to check out our next program on February 9th. It's our New South for the New Southerner program, where we're going to have the Charlotte Observer's own national award-winning journalist, Scott Fowler, who is going to be speaking on the Carolina Panthers and their 25 years of highs and lows, good and bad, and how the team has truly impacted Charlotte. And I think that's going to be a really rich conversation as well. And as always, New South for the New Southerner is brought to us by Bank of America and Mertz Heart and Soul. But again, you guys, thank you so much for joining us this evening for this powerful conversation. And we look forward to having you guys again soon. Okay.
Thank you.
Thank you, guys.
Thank you so much.
Thank you.